Next, from the state capitol, as the state legislature was ending its spring session, there were two competing bills that would reform state pensions. We talk with Representative Elaine Nekritz, the chairwoman of the House Pension Committee, and hear why she says the bill sponsored by House Speaker Madigan is the only bill that cuts costs enough to allow the state to afford future pension payments. This runs about 15 minutes.
Representative Elaine Nekritz, thanks for joining us. And one of the huge issues that everyone who follows the legislature knows, the biggest issue I would say is the pension issue, which you've been working on for some years now. By the time this airs, we will probably know which version of the bills have passed, whether Senator Cullerton's or, if any, Senator Cullerton's or Speaker Madigan's. Speaker Madigan's is SB-1, Senator Cullerton's is SB-2404, just for the viewers. As we stand here on Tuesday, the 28th, what do you think you'll get a pension? I know I'm asking in the crystal ball. Do you think a pension version will pass, or have you heard anything about it? If it doesn't pass, do you imagine the governor would call a special session?
I still remain optimistic that a pension proposal will pass. I think it's going to be challenging if we go past May 31st, whether the governor calls a special session or, not, because it requires a supermajority of votes in order to pass something after May 31st. We are challenged enough to get a regular majority on this issue, so I think a supermajority seems highly problematic. So I would, in order to get our budget in order in the next couple of years, this is a critical component to that, and I think we have to move ahead now.
And just today, some numbers, actuarial numbers came out, and people may be surprised to know the state in the past had not been using actuarial accounting on the pensions.
We have never in the history of the Illinois pension systems used really true actuarial science, and that's to me is one of the things about Senate Bill 1 is that it in every aspect it moves our pension systems to actuarial science, which is where we should have been, and we wouldn't be in this mess if we had used actuarial science all along.
What numbers do you remember the numbers off your head? Let's run through some of the numbers and why you support the Senator or House Speaker Madigan's bill, SB-1. Why do you think that's the right reform bill?
I think that's the right reform because we have $100 billion of unfunded liability. Our annual budget, discretionary budget, is $35 billion. So this is a huge liability for us to pay off, even over 30 years. And in order to be able to afford that, got some very dramatic changes. And I get that those changes are hard. They impact people in a very significant way. But our choices are limited. If we don't make significant reforms, the viability of the systems and the viability of our state budget, I think, are at risk. The numbers we just got back on Senate Bill 1, I think, achieve both of those goals. So we owe in the neighborhood of about $400 billion for these pension systems over the next 30 years. That trajectory is just really unsustainable for us. This would save about Senate Bill 1 would knock about $187 billion off of that. That's the largest savings of any of the proposals that have been put forth to date. And in the short run, what we would do is in fiscal year 15, when this would take effect, that would reduce our pension payment by almost $2 billion. The number was closer to $1.9 billion. We're struggling. We're making cuts this year. We're continuing to do things, dramatic things to education and things that no one wants to really do in the state of Illinois. This would reverse that. This could really help us reverse that trend.
Yeah, I think education has been cut something like 3 years in a row. I mean, just so people know.
This will be the third year in a row, and I think it's it's not quite $1 billion over the course of those 3 years, but it's pretty close. That's a really significant impact to local districts when we've got 2/3 or 3/4 of all the districts around the state in deficit spending.
The other aspect is the cost shift. How does that figure in? Senator or House Speaker Madigan wants to have a bill that would, over a period of time, shift the cost of the non-Chicago teachers' pensions to local school districts. Where do you stand on that, and what do you think as far as where that stands as far as passage?
We've been in extensive discussions over the last several days with representatives from all the school associations as to how to accomplish that. And really what we're asking is for districts to be responsible for the wages and benefits for their employees. It's not a novel concept. I think it's something that we all recognize should be done. The numbers that we last night from the teachers' retirement system, if Senate Bill 1 were to pass, would indicate that there wouldn't be anything to shift because the employer share of the pension cost would be zero. So that I think will. Some of this, how this plays out will depend on which version of the Senate of the pension reforms pass.
On the cost shift, one of the factors that the school district people and others say is, yes, we set the salaries or the benefit, but actually you, the legislature, still set the benefits. I would say they would have to pay, so it's unfair, they would say, because it's still not the person paying who's setting the benefits.
And we're very cognizant of that, but I will tell you that districts really don't want to be setting their own pension benefits because there's no economies of scale. I mean, they still, at the end of the day, having a statewide system is still the most effective way to do this. So we had to come up with a mechanism to make sure that if the General Assembly enhances a benefit, that the local district had some control over that. And what we've been proposing that's not final yet is actually, if the General Assembly enhances a benefit, that the teachers' retirement system and their board would have an opportunity to say yes or no to that benefit. If they felt they could afford it, they would say yes. If they felt they were in a good financial position, they'd say yes. If they're not, they can say no and tell the General Assembly go back to the drawing board.
All right, let me just ask a few more questions. As you are, I guess you're briefing your fellow lawmakers because they know you're the point person on pensions and personnel. With the new numbers, what kind of reaction are you getting as you're explaining this to your fellow House members? Are they getting it, or is it all over the board?
I think they get it. I think they got it when we passed Senate Bill 1 originally, that we kind of knew the order of magnitude of these numbers. This just pretty much confirms what we thought. It's in fact, a little bit more than we thought. And so I think they knew that this was the package that was significant enough to actually address the problem. What we're now talking about is what you just asked about, which is the cost shift and how that bill would impact anything we would do for our local school districts.
Is there any assurity to those homeowners out there who fear that their property taxes would skyrocket over a period of 10 to 12 years as that shift come in? Do they have any protections for the homeowners?
If there's nothing to shift, then there's no impact. And that's really what the numbers told us last night. Now, that doesn't mean in the future that there might not be some impact. I don't know how the going forward cost of the pensions where it will be in 10 or 15 years. But in the short run, what if, again, Senate Bill 1 would say that there's nothing to pass, there's zero to pass along to the local district. So shouldn't be any impact.
Do these need to be linked? I know the Speaker Madigan, I keep saying Senator, Speaker Madigan broke out the cost shift because it was so controversial. He wanted to have the members be able to vote separately on Senate Bill 1. But ultimately, to what extent are House members in their minds linking the two issues?
We need to be, we need to know, we'd like to be able to tell the districts to know what to expect. So we've been operating on the fact that there was going to be no pension reform and this is what they could expect. I think the members are starting to understand that even under that scenario, the impact to an individual homeowner is not terribly significant since that transfer would occur over 16 years. And so that, if you took an average $250,000 home and, in a district in central Illinois, I think that, the impact is not significant. I don't know whether we can. I don't think we'll be able to link them, given that the bills are already in each chamber, so they'll have to be dealt with separately. But we'll hopefully know what those numbers are.
Yeah, not legally, but I'm just thinking to what extent are people kind of.
I think people do understand that the extent of the reforms will directly impact the amount of the cost that we're asking districts to pick up.
And then the last thing, and again, this is somewhat unfair because I'm asking you to speculate, but if we achieve SB-1 becomes law, goes through the courts and is approved, is there any way to protect the future of the state so that we don't have this kind of, are there any protections within the bill that would say we're going to follow mathematical equations, we're not going to just be throwing political favoritism towards the pension system so that it goes off the tracks again? I
think there's two things that this bill accomplishes that would protect against that. One is we have a funding guarantee so that and we now allow the systems, the pension systems themselves, to go to court to say, you, state of Illinois, didn't make the payment to us, we're asking the courts to enforce that against you. That's a new cause of action that's never been out there. So we now inject a third party in this process so that we, the General Assembly, can't just say, never mind, we're not making a payment. We have that someone else has the ability to come in and enforce that, and I think that's very significant. The second thing is that we, as we started off the discussion, we've never used actuarial science in the state of Illinois. Everything about Senate Bill 1 is based on actuarial science. And so we can avoid the situation where we've got unfunded liability that builds up and that we don't pay for it. And because the actuarial science would say, as soon as you get an unfunded liability, let's say you have a bad year in the stock market, as soon as you get that, you have to start paying it off. We've always ignored that. And so we're not going to, the statute would avoid that situation. And again, I think that's a very significant change from the Illinois pension math that we've used in the past.
All right, well, thanks again.
All right, thanks, Terry.
Thanks.
The Illinois Channel's coverage of legislative issues is underwritten in part by AARP Illinois.